What happens when a man with no suit, no PR team, no election victory, and no international backing threatens an entire government, without saying a single word? This isn't a movie. It's real. In Kenya's streets, the name whispered isn't their president's. It's someone from miles away, a captain, not a politician. A farmer, not a financier. A man named Ibrahim Traoré. And somehow, his silence is louder than any African summit. Why? Let's find out. Kenya calls itself East Africa's democratic beacon, but today, that light is flickering. And it's not because of bullets or protests. It's because of a man in fatigues thousands of miles away, a man who never insulted their government, never tweeted a threat, never issued a single official statement, and yet, the Kenyan elite are panicking. His name is Ibrahim Traoré, the young military captain of Burkina Faso. He doesn't sit at the AU. He doesn't wear a tie. He didn't win an election. But he has something far more powerful: results. And now Kenya's highest officials are calling him a threat to democracy itself. But if he's just a soldier, why are they so afraid? It all exploded at a funeral. Kenya's Prime Cabinet Secretary Musalia Mudavadi took the mic, and instead of honoring the dead, he pointed fingers. What you see online, those masked faces, those uniforms, that's not leadership, he said. That's theater. That's fear. He didn't name Traore, but he didn't have to. The message was clear. Kenya had officially declared ideological war on a man who had never even spoken their name. But why now? Why him? The answer lies in Kenya's crisis. In 2022, William Ruto rose to power on the back of hustlers, the poor, the street vendors, the hungry youth. He promised to fight elite corruption, to stand with the common man. But just 2 years later, those same people were being chased, tear-gassed, shot, and buried. In June 2024, a finance bill hit the nation like a storm: new taxes on fuel, flour, diapers, even internet. While mothers struggled to buy cooking oil, ministers drove convoys of armored cars. While students couldn't afford Wi-Fi, billions were being siphoned through fraudulent healthcare contracts. The youth rose up. TikTok videos became protests. Protests became clashes. Clashes became coffins. By July 2025, over 100 young Kenyans had been confirmed dead. No trials. No justice. Just numbers. One 19-year-old was shot holding a cardboard sign that read, "We are hungry." Another disappeared after tweeting criticism, only to be found tortured, discarded like trash. And the president called this democracy. He said order must be maintained. He warned Kenya not to become like Burkina Faso. But here's the question: what kind of democracy kills children and jails poets? What kind of government blames outsiders while hospitals collapse and clinics rot? The media was silenced. Journalists fired. Bloggers arrested. Even radio hosts vanished from the air. A quiet threat spread across Nairobi: don't speak the president's name. And while trust burned, the government needed a distraction. So they pointed outward. At Traore. But Traore didn't respond. He didn't clap back. He just kept walking through cassava fields with his people. That's what made him dangerous. Because he didn't try to be admired. He tried to build. While Kenya held press conferences, Traore held seeds. While Ruto gave speeches about IMF partnerships, Traore gave land to the poor. While Kenya raised taxes to pay foreign loans, Burkina Faso rejected debt and planted sorghum. The contrast was unbearable. Because what Traore represents isn't a military takeover. It's a leadership model that embarrasses governments who talk but never act. He didn't criticize Kenya. But his silence made their failure louder. He built trust while they buried it. He gave food while they taxed flour. And that's why Kenya fears him, not because he's attacking them, but because he's making people ask, what if leadership could actually deliver? The fear of Traore didn't begin with his voice. It began with his results. While Kenyan officials held forums in air-conditioned halls, Traore was in the dirt, redistributing land, dispatching tractors, digging wells. His government launched a $981 million food sovereignty plan without IMF aid, without waiting for Western permission. His message was brutal but honest: we will plant or we will starve, but we will not borrow to eat. And people listened. In a continent addicted to foreign charity, growing your own food became a political act. But it didn't stop there. Traore turned to gold, the lifeblood of Burkina Faso. Where Kenya's elite secretly leased mines to multinationals, Traore nationalized every inch. French soldiers guarding extraction sites were expelled. "You took enough," he said. "Leave the rest to us." Within months, state revenue tripled. With no begging, no donor meetings, no international applause, the gold started building schools, reopening hospitals, and feeding the children. In silence. No flashy announcements. No photo ops. Just work. And that's what terrified Kenya's government. Because in their world, change only happens when the West approves it. But Traore was rewriting that rulebook with mud on his boots and crops in his hands. Across Nairobi, his face began appearing, not as a rebel, but as a symbol. On TikTok, protest videos showed teenagers chanting his name. On Matatus, slogans were painted in red: "We don't beg, we build." Even in church sermons, his quotes appeared beside scripture. "We must till the land before it tilts us toward death." He wasn't campaigning. He was cultivating. And slowly, quietly, the youth of Kenya began asking the question their leaders feared most: why not us? Why can't we have land instead of lectures? Why are we dying for Wi-Fi while billions disappear into ghost contracts? Why is Cassava in Burkina Faso more revolutionary than democracy in Kenya? Because deep down, they knew the truth: Traore had become an idea. An idea that leadership doesn't need permission. That dignity isn't imported. That results matter more than rituals. And the Kenyan government knew they couldn't fight that idea with bullets or press conferences. So they mocked it. Called him a mirage. Said he was AI-generated propaganda. But the more they tried to laugh, the louder the whisper became. Because when your citizens start quoting a man you never acknowledged, when your youth idolize a captain instead of your cabinet, when your streets chant for Cassava while your parliament debates IMF loans, you don't have a propaganda problem. You have a legitimacy crisis. Traore never asked to be their mirror. But he became one. And the reflection is unbearable. While Kenyan politicians fly to Brussels, Traore walks through Bobo Dioulasso. While they sign trade deals, he signs deeds for widows. While they cut education budgets, he builds village schools. And with every step, he says nothing. But his silence speaks louder than their slogans. And the youth, beaten, tear-gassed, silenced, they see that silence and hear something they've long forgotten: hope. Not hashtag hope. Not press release hope. But cassava-stained, calloused hand hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, Africa doesn't have to choose between ballots and batons. Between corruption and chaos. That maybe a leader doesn't have to speak well, just act well. And that maybe the real threat isn't the man with the uniform. It's the man who delivers. But while Traore's quiet revolution grew roots, Kenya's crisis deepened. In June 2025, young protesters filled the streets, not with Molotovs or machetes, but with signs and songs. They marched in uniforms of school shirts and backpacks, demanding dignity, not war. They cried, "We are hungry," but were met with bullets. On June 25, in the heart of Nairobi, police opened fire on a peaceful march filled with teenagers. Not terrorists. Not criminals. Students. Coders. Poets. Children. Some were killed instantly. Others bled on the pavement. Some ran and never returned. Their names trended on social media for a day, then disappeared, like they never existed. The government said they were investigating. But the only thing buried faster than their bodies was the truth. And while this unfolded, Traore said nothing. He didn't send condolences. He didn't tweet. He just kept farming, walking, building. And yet somehow, his name echoed louder in Nairobi than the president's. Because real leadership doesn't arrive with speeches, it arrives with seeds. While Kenyan youth bled, Burkinabe youth harvested. While Kenya jailed teenagers for protest songs, Traore handed out land deeds to farmers. While one government criminalized outrage, the other rewarded initiative. That contrast cut deeper than any speech. It spread like wildfire, not through media channels but through whispers, in WhatsApp groups, prayer circles, classroom corners. Traore became the image of everything Kenya's youth had been denied: action, truth, care. He didn't offer slogans. He offered cassava. He didn't beg for respect. He planted it. And that is the power that Kenya's ruling class couldn't comprehend. Because they were trained in image, not impact. They mastered press conferences, not food distribution. They posed in front of flags while their people starved. But Traore? He just worked. And in doing so, he reshaped the idea of power. No blue checkmark. No media entourage. Just mud, sweat, and belief. So when Ruto's government called him a threat, it wasn't just political. It was personal. Because Traore did what they had failed to do, not with aid, but with authenticity. Not with polished English, but with harvested grain. The Kenyan youth saw it. And they responded, not with revolt, but with refusal. Refusal to believe the lie that freedom means suffering in silence. Refusal to accept that elections fix everything. Refusal to bow to leaders who raise taxes and lower hope. Traore never claimed to be perfect. He leads a nation under threat. But every seed he plants is a message: sovereignty starts with soil. And the youth understand. They no longer ask for speeches. They ask for land. They no longer chant party slogans. They chant for cassava. Not because it's trendy, because it feeds them. Because it means survival. And survival is now the highest form of protest. While Kenya paints protesters as thugs, Burkina Faso calls its youth heroes. While one government builds walls, the other builds wells. And the world is watching. But not through official reports or diplomatic visits. Through phone screens, through TikToks, through bootleg YouTube clips. Through whispers that say, leadership is not about sound. It's about substance. And in that silent revolution, Traore stands tall. Because in a continent full of noise, silence is now the loudest roar. As Traore's image rose beyond borders, it wasn't only Kenya that felt the tremor. Across Africa, whispers became waves. In Ghana, student unions invoked his name in reform campaigns. In Nigeria, preachers quoted him during Sunday sermons. In South Africa, hashtags bearing his words trended for days. Yet the man himself remained silent, hidden behind calloused hands and cassava fields. That silence, however, became his loudest speech. In a world where presidents hire Western PR firms to craft their legacies, Traore used soil and sweat. While others bought TV time, he built irrigation lines. His every action stood in contrast to the polished emptiness of the political class. But that contrast had a cost. Kenya's elite grew more desperate. Accusations against Traore turned absurd. He was called a mirage, a foreign invention, even artificial intelligence. Yet the hunger in Kenyan homes was real. The youth being buried were real. The silence from the government, also real. And in that void, even the most apolitical Kenyan could feel something shifting. This wasn't just about one leader. It was about the weight of example. Because Traore, without a single speech, had become a mirror, and the reflection it offered was devastating. While Kenyan MPs signed bills that taxed cooking oil, Traore was delivering land titles to single mothers. While politicians in Nairobi promised reforms, he planted them. While one nation screamed democracy, the other quietly defined it. Not through ceremonies, but through cassava. Not with votes, but with harvests. And the people noticed. But so did the institutions. International lenders raised eyebrows. Think tanks warned of populist threats. Western diplomats quietly asked if Traore was setting a dangerous precedent. Because if one African nation could rise without their permission, who might be next? Who else might say no to loans, to mining contracts, to external control? And that is when it became clear, Traore wasn't just governing. He was resisting. Not with weapons, but with self-reliance. And to those used to African dependence, that was the most radical act of all. But inside Kenya, the panic grew. President Ruto's speeches turned defensive. "We are not Burkina Faso," he declared. But the crowd didn't cheer. Because the truth had become too obvious. In Kenya, you needed permission to protest. In Burkina Faso, you needed permission to plow. In Kenya, Wi-Fi was taxed. In Burkina Faso, internet was scarce, but land was free. In Kenya, ministers built fences. In Burkina Faso, they built food banks. And so, despite the propaganda, the people compared. Not because Traore asked them to, but because the truth was visible. Leadership was no longer a theory. It was a harvest. And in the streets of Nairobi, amidst smoke and sirens, hope began to germinate, not loud, not viral, but steady. The youth understood they had been sold symbols, not solutions. They had voted, but their voices had been priced. And now, they were looking elsewhere. Not to the West. Not to elections. But to action. Tangible. Measurable. Edible. And in that search, they found Traore. Not as a savior. But as proof. That it can be done. That a nation can rise, not through loans, but through labor. Not through applause, but through autonomy. And that idea, quiet, stubborn, resilient, now travels faster than fear. In the end, it was never about Traore alone. It was never just about Ruto, or Kenya, or Burkina Faso. It was about a question that had haunted Africa for decades: what kind of leadership do we deserve? For too long, people were told to vote and wait. To protest and be patient. To accept hardship as a right of nationhood. But Traore flipped that script. He didn't demand applause. He demanded action. He didn't ask for legitimacy. He earned it. And for Kenya's Gen Z, battered, tear-gassed, ignored, that difference became a rallying cry. Not through speeches, but through whispers. Not in parliaments, but in playgrounds. Across Nairobi, youth began quoting him not as a hero, but as a reminder. A reminder that leadership doesn't wear suits, it wears sweat. That governments shouldn't just promise food, they should grow it. That freedom isn't a slogan, it's breakfast on the table. And so, a man who never campaigned suddenly became the most mentioned name in protests he never organized. His image painted on walls. His words printed on t-shirts. His silence louder than any press conference ever aired. But this wasn't worship. It was reflection. Because for every child who watched a friend die in protest, for every student who marched with nothing but a sign, Traore became the answer to a question they had long feared to ask: is this suffering normal? Is this what democracy is supposed to look like? Traore's Burkina Faso still faces poverty, insurgency, isolation. But in those struggles, people are reclaiming something deeper: ownership. When he hands out land, he's not just fighting hunger. He's fighting the idea that survival must be outsourced. That Africa must wait for permission to live. And that is what makes him dangerous. Not his army. Not his youth. His refusal to beg. In a continent trained to kneel, he plants. In a generation trained to scroll, he grows. And in doing so, he disrupts every lie ever told about African governance. That we need donors to breathe. That we need suits to lead. That we need slogans to survive. Traore doesn't speak those languages. He speaks soil. And that language now echoes across a continent. Because when a young Kenyan sees cassava grow in the dust of Bobo Dioulasso, they begin to wonder, what if we planted our own? What if we stopped apologizing for demanding bread, land, and peace, all at once? What if leadership wasn't about optics, but about outcomes? And what if the next revolution didn't come with fire and fury, but with water and harvest? These aren't fantasies. These are seeds. And in Kenya, the soil is cracked, but it is still there. It is waiting. So when leaders mock Traore, when they call him a mirage, a myth, remember this: the people don't follow mirages. They follow results. And when they see those results with their own eyes, when they taste them, feel them, live them, no propaganda can stop them from asking, why not here? Why not now? Traore doesn't answer those questions. He simply plants. And in that silence, 1,000 answers bloom. So if you're watching this, know that leadership is no longer about speeches. It's about soil. It's no longer about ballots alone. It's about bread. It's no longer about waiting. It's about growing. And Africa, your time to grow is now.